Joining me in the studio, it's been a little while, but I've never seen someone dressed more appropriately with a Superman t-shirt on. It's Julian Raven. Julian, thanks so much for being on the show.
Good morning, Frank, and thank you for having me. It's great to be back. And a happy 4th of July to you.
And you too. And I know we haven't talked in a while, and so I'm hoping that you can give a background to people that haven't followed this journey like we all have online, but there's some people that may not be aware of what you're going through.
Well, Frank, this has been a story that you have been obviously instrumental in helping me sort of walk with and through for the last... really since I painted the painting.
Yep.
When you came to that first inauguration on November the 3rd, 2015, wow. At the campaign rally we had there in Elmira. And then from then onwards, the story has just been, the campaign, the painting, that whole part, and then getting to the election and the win, and then, okay, now what?
Right.
And as I traveled across the country, I would hear this echo amongst people. And it started on November the 3rd. A lady at that gathering, she said, oh, this portrait needs to be in the Smithsonian. And then in Iowa, someone in Iowa, or a couple of people. And then in L.A., and I heard this, it must have been 5, 6, 7 people across the country would say to me, this needs to be in the Smithsonian. And so after Donald Trump became the president-elect, I was like, what are we going to do now? What am I doing with this painting? And I literally was like, God, help me. I don't know what to do with this thing. And I started thinking and remembering Smithsonian. Mm-hmm. So I then embarked upon this journey to apply to the Smithsonian. A lot of very good things I discovered that would give grounds for me to apply and have the portrait shown for the inauguration. A lot of precedent, and I wrote it in
It's a defining painting, in my opinion, of the, if you're going to be the Smithsonian, that's the painting you want in, because you were everywhere. You're in Iowa, and you mentioned 2015. You were ahead of the curve. This wasn't like you painted it when Trump won.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so to me, there was no question, and we talked about at the time, that should have been in the Smithsonian.
Right, and it's a portrait of Trump as president. It's not just a portrait of, it's a deliberate image that is crafted as Trump as president because of the conviction that I had that he would win. And so, you make this application, and then I experienced this really, traumatic phone call from the director of the National Portrait Gallery, Kim Sayat, who calls me up personally after this application has gone in. And there were other details around there before then. And it was shocking. And just for the listeners to remember, the final words, this really paints a picture of the attitude that this woman had when she called me. The final words to me, and it was an argument. It was an 11-minute. She didn't expect me to be able to come back with the facts that I had, and knowledge about the application, or knowledge about, for example, the Obama Hope poster. And when I confronted her with the truth about that, she lied, and she defended her lies, and it became an argument because now she was defensive. I'm defending, and it became an 11-minute argument.
Wow.
And at the end of it, after I kept refuting each of her objections, which were arbitrary, she was inventing standards, she was twisting the Smithsonian standards, and she was lying. Mm-hmm. I confronted her so much so that at the end she said to me, I'm the director of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. Your application is going nowhere. You can appeal it all you want. And wow. That's how, and you think this is the director of
the grown-up.
a director of it. And I was shocked. Mm-hmm. I was numb and silenced for 2 days. I couldn't even speak to my wife about it. I walked around like this internal shockwave.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, all right, well, how am I going to appeal? And so I then appealed. I write an appeal to the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution, and that gets swatted aside to the Smithsonian provost, who is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Curran. And he again tramples the aspect that it was a legal appeal, that I had been actually told, even though this woman obviously was saying it in jest or mocking me, saying, you can appeal it all you want. I said, okay, I'm going to appeal this.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to do it. So I do that. And so it gets thrown to the curb, and again, trampling my rights, trampling my application, trampling the appeal. The appeal had been supported by all of the local regional politicians here, official letters of appeal from Congressman Reed, Senator O'Mara, Assemblyman Chris Friend, and even yourself, Frank. You wrote that letter of recommendation as a voice in this community, as somebody who's had your finger on the pulse, and not just that. And then you're saying all of these people, all of these officials, all of these recognized people, they officially endorse and support this application because it would be a great thing to have at the inauguration of then President-elect Donald Trump. and they spit it out. And so then in that condition, I then went into this after the appeal was thrown to the curb. I then said, you know what, now I'm going to sue these people. And I embarked on a lawsuit. What that was, I had no idea. I started researching and reading, and thank God for Google. Because, without it, you'd be stuck somewhere in a library
all day.
for hundreds of thousands of hours. And anyway, so I filed the suit, and
they probably wanted you to go away at that point. Just to give a time frame, you had a very small window to get it into the Smithsonian before inauguration day.
This was December 1st of 2000. That's when I had the phone call, December 1st of 2015.
16, yeah.
2016, sorry.
And you only had till January 20th.
20th. Right? Yeah. So I had a 6 to 8 week window. And then, to try to get this, with some, and I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know how to go about that. So, but I started, and I filed a complaint in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. Well, it turns out to be the wrong court. And that then leads to then a transfer. But then the transfer from that court to the district court in the District of Columbia was one of the most encouraging things at the time, because the judge in that court said, I can't transfer this basically unless it has sufficient legal merit.
Right.
If it's a frivolous claim, he's going to throw it. He said, I'm not going to transfer something that's frivolous. But he didn't, and he certified its validity even then, and that was grounds for me to keep moving forward. So then that was Now that brings us to the summer of, after all that paperwork went through, to the summer of last year, 2017. And then it arrives in the federal court in like June of 2017, and it's been in federal court now for a year and change into that. So that's where we are right now, and a lot has been taking place. And the why I'm here today is because there's a lot of back and forth with the Department of Justice, who is representing the Smithsonian Institution. But the good part about it is that the case, in my opinion, is mushrooming into all these all these issues that are critical to what this case means and how much impact it's going to have. And obviously, it's at the same stage that we were in September, October of last year, which is the motion to dismiss stage, where the Department of Justice they basically are trying to throw the case out, trying to question its legal sufficiency. When it's at the motion to dismiss stage, they do say they have to accept what I claim is true.
Okay.
They have to sort of say, well, it's probably like, for the sake of argument, we accept what he says is true. This is what the law says. But now we're going to show you how it doesn't have legal footing. And that has been a sweet experience for me, because they've got it completely wrong.
Yeah, and I want to clarify for people, you're not a lawyer.
Absolutely not.
So this must be, and we talked about it quickly off the air, but to me that sounds intimidating. When they send something and they're really trying to nitpick, I'll use that term, to find legal reasons to throw it out. And you've got to be saying to yourself, well, I'm not a lawyer. Did I get this right, or did I get this wrong?
Absolutely. And that's where, it is a battle. It's a battle in your mind. It's a battle of will. It's a battle of then, am I able to understand what I'm reading? Because literally I would understand very little of it.
Oh, sure.
And then you go and start reading, and you start reading and studying and reading cases and trying to understand the cases and trying to understand the judge's rulings. You're like, what in the world are they talking about? And the more that I did this, and my whole case has evolved and matured. And it's a blessing that it's been taking the time that it has, because it's allowed it to be fine-tuned down to these really critical issues. And the great thing is where we are right now is that we are at this threshold of this motion to dismiss, and there is a flurry of activity going on now, because I learned that at this motion to dismiss stage is where I can really slug it out with them in the filing of motions to do with different issues that are part of this case. And what's interesting is the last motion the DOJ filed, which was day before yesterday, they're trying to get the judge to block. It's like a stay of briefing, meaning they say, we don't want you to rule on any of his motions until you've ruled on the motion of the dismiss. And they're trying to block my motions now, and I have to respond to that again. I've got to respond this week, and I'm like, they are fighting tooth and nail to do this, and part of it, I said this to you before, is frustrating, which is I'm dealing with the Department of Justice. Right. They should be on my side.
I know, that's what's so weird.
This is what's so wrong with it, and this is like, whether or not the individual lawyers who are involved in this are personally anti-Trump, whether or not that this the civil division for whatever reason, because I appealed to Jeff Sessions.
Right.
I don't know you heard that the Department of Justice wrote these letters of interest concerning that free speech case in the University of Berkeley, California.
Right.
The DOJ in 2 occasions have stood up and said, "Don't at the motion to dismiss stage of this lawsuit, where the defendants in the University of Berkeley case, the lawyers for the university, are trying to dismiss the case." The DOJ stood up and said to the judge, and they filed a supporting, letter. Don't dismiss this case. We don't make an opinion as to whether they're right or they're wrong, but because it's an issue of free speech and free speech is being shut down on college campuses, we know that it's vital that it not be dismissed so it can move forward into this, the case can mature. So I'm like, okay, so the Department of Justice is writing a letter on behalf of these claimants, on these plaintiffs, about a free speech case in violation at a university, and yet they're defending the Smithsonian against a free speech case, because my case is a free speech case. Part of it is a major chunk of that, and I'm like, what is wrong with it? It's like, how come you're not? So I wrote to Jeff Sessions and all these other attorneys at the DOJ. I wrote this big package, and I said, I'm writing to you in the same spirit, and I'm asking you to write a letter of interest, on my behalf, that you support my case, even while you're defending it. I mean, even while you're defending against it. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? You should be standing up for justice. You should be standing up for freedom of speech. This woman clearly has trampled my rights. And I didn't get any response to that.
No response. Wow.
But you know what? I've learned a lot. I've mailed, in the midst of this campaign, Frank, I've mailed letters all over Washington, and they just do not respond. People do not respond, and it's discouraging.
Oh, sure.
You're like, did they get it? I don't know if they got it. But what I did do is each time I do this, I'm pinning something to the door saying, whether you respond or not, I'm calling you out. Because if you want to defend free speech, and this is the thing, in California, and you want to defend those, well, what about us in D.C. in the swamp? What about at the Smithsonian Institution? Why are you not defending the citizens? Why are you not defending the beneficiaries? Why are you actually defending these people and persisting in your defense? I spoke to someone the other day who had a good insight into the situation. He says, what I can't believe is how they are spending so much time defending them. Why are they not just, dealing with this? Because it's clear, in that sense. So the good news is that this case has to move forward and has to get certified by this judge's decisions, because it's going to give footing to every other person that gets slapped about by these biased ideological pirates in the Smithsonian Institution. When a little Joe and little Mary go in there and they get slapped about by these people because of their ideology. And it's not that this is some strange claim. It's gone on and going on across this entire nation. In every academic institution, the anti-Trump bias, anti-conservative bias, anti-Christian bias, anti-American bias by these leftist ideologues that have perverted and poisoned our institutions, and not just one of them. We're talking about schools where little kids are being taught, all the way up to the institutions of higher education, and now the Smithsonian. It's everywhere. And it's like, this has got to stop. So once, by the grace of God, I get these rulings, once I move into discovery, these will keep giving grounds to the next people to file in similar ways. Because if you research online, there are very little cases against the Smithsonian online, and very little successful cases against the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian had been allowed, for either because of mismanagement or leadership, to devolve basically over time and drift out of its original established identity, and it became something else. And it's in that something else legal condition, nobody has been able to puncture the balloon. Nobody's been able to grab it, because it's like they stand there and say, you can't touch us. That's what the DOJ is saying. Oh, you can't touch them. They have the Smithsonian. They don't. There's no free speech rights in the Smithsonian Institution. It's government speech. When the Smithsonian makes a decision, it's the government speaking. I'm like, you guys are idiots. You've got it completely wrong. This isn't the government. It's a where the Smithsonian came from. I'm having to argue ad nauseum to say it's a will of a man from England, a private British non-American who gave his money to America with a will, and America accepted the will in trust and say, we are going to fulfill his desires. And the will and the person that's speaking is this will of Smithson, not the government. And I tell you, Frank, I have argued this, and it's been such an education, but they persist in trying to say, no, it's the government speaking. I said, no, it's not. The government only speaks when the people give power to elected officials and they give a position where the government... This is nothing. The government is purely acting as a trustee of a private will.
And that's why they treated you the way they did, because they're so used to being untouchable, right? They're bureaucracy. And so for someone to challenge them, that's why you got that 11-minute phone call, and that's why you've seen them handle it. They're judge, jury, and executioner in their mind.
Absolutely. There is a culture in the Smithsonian that they have grown into where they believe that they can act in certain ways with complete disregard to the American people.
And they've been getting away with it. It's a sad thing. They've been getting away with it until now.
For a long, long time. And that case I've mentioned before, Frank, which is the case of Dr. Richard von Sternberg, who was the molecular biologist who published that art back in 2010, I believe, about 10 years ago, and the documentary by Ben Stein, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, was all about how they expelled this microbiologist from the Smithsonian. He wasn't an actual Smithsonian employee, but he was an affiliate employee of a publication in the Smithsonian, and he published a peer-reviewed article on intelligent design, and there was an uproar in the Smithsonian science community. They basically tarred and feathered this guy. They basically destroyed him. They conspired against him. They got him fired. They destroyed his career. And guess what? It turns out that he did exactly what the law and what he was required to do. He published that exactly. And the Smithsonian even came out afterwards and says, after internal review, it turns out that he did exactly what he was supposed to. He did nothing wrong. And,
after his life's been destroyed.
And his life's been destroyed. And they never made it up to him. They never... And I'm like, you know what? This has got to stop. So if my case gives footing to other people, that we then have a way to bring this institution to heel, that you would say these people have got to bring this institution back to its original purpose. And it's all in black and white. I'm not inventing this. I did the research. I've spent thousands of hours now studying the history, the founding, the establishing, the reasons, the Smithsonian, the documents, the original documents. I mean, thank God for Google. Yeah. And then you say that and the reason why the Department of Justice is arguing so incorrectly is because they too are in this place where they have this concept of the Smithsonian that's just
not true.
It's just not true. And I'm not making it up. It's like, there it is. So we're at that stage where the judge now, and my job is to educate the judge by sending him all this information so that the judge can look at it and say, well, it's right there. These are all the cases. This is the history. It's right there. How can we be arguing something different? Mm-hmm. And then when he makes the ruling, it's going to reestablish the correct identity of the institution, that this is a trust. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. It's like a non-profit being run by the government with someone else's money for the increase and diffusion of knowledge amongst men. That is it. Mm-hmm. Nothing more. And they say it themselves in their documents. So what my job is to obviously bring that to the table now. And the blessing is that when these rulings happen, the judge has to follow the law and rule accordingly. If he got it wrong, which I don't believe he's going to do, this judge is Judge Trevor McFadden.
You like him?
Absolutely. He's a Trump appointee. He was a member of the Federalist Society for 16 years. He's a Scalia disciple.
Good.
He was a federal prosecutor, so he's this guy smells blood in the water. He wants justice. You know what I'm saying? That's his disposition, and I have great confidence that he's going to read this and say, yeah, you know what? This is absolutely outrageous, and rule on my side. And there's other motions which I want to get to in a bit, which we touched on before. For example, when the director of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, the day of Trump's inauguration, tweets on the official page the anti-Trump New York Times. Yeah, the New York Times article on the January 20th. Again, darkness and gloom over Washington at the inauguration on the official National Portrait Gallery director's Twitter page. And then the next day, she tweets all these smiling photographs of at the Women's March, anti-Trump protests, loved the Women's March on the official National Portrait. Now, I don't know. I got to tell you what happened with that. Yeah. That's another thing that's happened.
Oh, go ahead. Well, you got me hooked.
Well, when I highlighted, that's part of my claims to prove anti-Trump bias, that she has an animus, she has an attitude, a hatred. Don't forget, when I spoke to her, it was December 1st, 2016. This is only a couple of weeks after Trump had won the election.
Right.
The rage and the fury in the liberal mindset was, she called me up. I felt like she just wanted to give me a piece of her mind, that she wanted to get one little Trump supporter and just slap him, and we're going to put you, because this is the only way I'm going to get a little vengeance, you know, and that's how it felt. It really did. And it's like, okay, so she does that, and then I filed my case, and I could, claim anti-Trump bias, and however, and that's okay, and that's my claim. But then the woman goes and tweets on January the 20th to the official @NPG Twitter page, that anti-Trump article. The next day, she tweets these photos at the anti-Trump protest. This is the protest where Madonna says, "I've thought a lot lately about blowing up the White House." And then Ashley Judd or whatever, Hitler's mustache has been replaced by a yellow toupee. These accusations coming from the Women's March by all these people, and this director of the National Portrait Gallery is at that march saying,
I love it.
I love it. And tweeting it to and you're like, this is insane. Well, guess what? I filed a Hatch Act complaint with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. I filed this complaint, and they did an investigation. And you know what they came back and said to me? Said, well, actually, she didn't violate the Hatch Act because it turns out that the Women's March organization is not a political organization. It's a social welfare organization. Frank,
it's unbelievable.
Frank, I mean, it's social welfare. And then, but they also twisted it, because underneath where it says social welfare, there's a little asterisk that says, but even if it's a social welfare organization, federal officials are extremely cautioned to participate, because social welfare organizations can be political, and by participating in that political element in a social welfare, you violate the Hatch Act. They didn't tell me that. Yeah. When I had to go back and look at their letter and read it, and then I wrote back to the U.S. and I said, how come you didn't tell me this, that she could violate the Hatch Act under a... They never replied to me.
Never replied. Wow.
And I'm left again like, these people are insane. But anyway, by filing that Hatch Act investigation, it put more pressure on the Smithsonian. You know what they did with those tweets? The Smithsonian, when I got the screenshots, they have the director of the National Portrait Gallery. It was at NPG Director. And on that Twitter page, it's a website. There were the legal disclaimers of the Smithsonian Institution. All digital content is property of the Smithsonian Institution. All the tweets, property of the Smithsonian. A big legal page of disclaimers. Oh, yeah. And then they have the website, www.smithsonian.org. So this is an official page. What they did at some point, because it's in that Hatch Act investigation, they said, well, we did find the tweets, but the tweets have been changed. That they changed all the legal claims, Frank, and they made it her personal website. So what the Smithsonian has done, whether they did it with her or whether she stole it, is they took government property that was once legally claimed under title belonging to the government of the United States, to the Smithsonian Institution, and they have given it to a private non-American citizen in order to protect her, because I put the pressure on. They changed the contents from government to an individual. Now it says on there, at kimsayit.com, her website, and it's the Twitter hashtag is at kimsayit. And I'm like...
Just with a wave of the hand, they did that.
I don't know. Yeah. And this is the thing. So now what I filed another motion, which is called...
As if you didn't have enough going on.
Right. Well, you see, I'm trying to understand. I'm like, this is outrageous. Yeah. This is outrageous. They are. How do you take something that belongs to the government and give it to a foreigner? Yeah. How do you do that? How do you transfer title? And I then wrote to the Smithsonian all these letters. I want to see the meetings and the minutes of the meetings where you guys certified the transfer of title from you to a private citizen. You just gave it away. No response. So I'm really frustrated. I'm like, how do I make this stick? How do I make this stick? And so I'm in my case, I'm researching, and then one day I hear on the radio, Mueller's investigation. Mueller slaps Manafort with a tampering of evidence thing, and I'm like, tampering of evidence? Oh, thank you, Mueller. I'm actually getting some better. So I start researching, and sure enough, in a civil case, they don't always call it tampering of evidence. They call it spoliation of evidence. Okay. If an institution, or especially the government has fair knowledge that information is going to be used in litigation, and it is because it's been in my claim since the beginning. If they change, if they delete, alter, if they touch that evidence, in other words, the spoliation means if you change it in any shape or form that will prejudice me, right, and try to protect you, you violate the law. Wow. And there's a motion before the judge there right now for the spoliation. And this is what they're trying. The DOJ is trying to get him to don't rule on that. Rule on this. And I'm like, hold on, I've got to reply to that today or tomorrow, and I'm going to be saying like, are we in a world where we want justice? I mean, these people have clearly taken evidence that I cited as proof of an anti-Trump animus by a government official, tweeted to a government page. And then you people have now changed that to make it look like it was just her personal page. It was just her personal opinion. Frank, it enrages me that people are doing this. But as we were discussing earlier, it's no surprise because of the swamp nature, the lack of integrity, the lack of decency, the lack of just saying, this is, why didn't the Department of Justice say, and they might be going after behind the scenes saying, how in the world are you changing because in my motion, I'm saying I want to know how the department. In other words, you can't dismiss my case because discovery has to happen so that I can find out how these people made this major shift with the evidence. And the beautiful thing is, it clearly says in the law and in the quoted cases that I have that if the evidence, cited evidence, is altered. Because the DOJ, she wrote back to me, she said, but the tweets are still there. Yeah. And I said, yeah, they're still there, but they've been changed to make them look like they're no longer official, posted to official.
And after the fact. I mean, that's so far gone. People aren't checking those old tweets. They only did it to cover themselves.
And it's so clear.
Yeah.
You get it. When you're clear in your mind, you get it. You don't, it's not a hesitation. You don't get it. And then you're like, and now they want to try to say, but the tweets are still. I said, yeah, but the tweets are there, but they're altered. Yeah, they're altered. And I quote the law. I said, there it is. You must preserve the evidence, and if you alter it, you violate the law. And so that motion is waiting as well. So this is the setup now. You see, they're trying to say, Judge, dismiss the case. And now I got another motion saying, Judge, they're altering the evidence. How can you dismiss the case? It's more evidence of what I'm saying, and they can't stand it. So that's the one point where I find myself right now, and that brings me to that final motion, which I emailed to you the other day, which to me is the pièce de résistance.
Well, Julian Raven is our guest. Tell us about that. But before you do tell us about that specifically, so what is the time frame on this? You said I have to send this and that. I mean, you're constantly working.
Constantly, yeah. I'm working to survive. Survive, exactly. Well, and thank God we're still here. Last year we were trying to move to D.C. If you remember, economically it's just been brutal. And obviously this is extremely time-consuming. The more that I've done, the better I got at it, so it doesn't take as much time as before. But yeah, obviously we're trying to survive. Thank God we're still here. Thank God we're able to. And but coming to this next point right now, it really has been. I explained to my wife, this is the peculiar thing of this journey, which is I have experienced great darkness and depression and just discouragement and like despair and like, well, how can I be? Where are these people? Why are they not? Why is the Department of Justice not? They should be defending me.
Yeah, Trump's Department of Justice.
Yeah,
they should,
what I mean? Right. They should be defending justice. You know what I'm saying? Say, what's wrong with these? So you go through these, and then it's a very lonely journey. And it's like I said to you before. I talk to people about it. If they listen, they look at me like, "What you talking about?" They don't get it. The people that I know, my poor wife, she has to listen to me rant and rave. My kids, you should see sometimes at dinner, they'll sit there and stare at me like this, and I'm like, blah, 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 oh, and I'm excited, and they're like, oh my. So, but they have learned a great deal as well. My wife and I, she said, "Well, honey, you've said this so much now that I'm beginning to understand it." And she's been such a blessing. And there's a shout out to my wife and kids for their love, patience, their prayers, and encouragement to me, because it is wearisome. It's this I learned as well, Frank, in that the success in law is about being not just knowing what you're doing, but hanging in there.
Yeah.
And
that's what this seems like. They wanted you out of there.
Oh, absolutely. And most times it's economic. And because I'm representing myself, it's my own time.
Right.
And it's like, because if you were paying a lawyer to do this would
you
be...
You couldn't do it.
No, this absolutely... No, that's why I'm not doing it. Because
Right.
it's impossible.
Yeah.
So you're like... And that's the blessing. So you're in this place. You're in this place of just perseverance and endurance and struggling and holding on and then researching. And then suddenly you get these moments of euphoria. And I have had moments of pleasure, Frank, when the light has switched on, when I found certain things in this case. I said to my wife the other day, it is pleasure in my mind.
Sure.
It is like ecstasy. And I'll walk around laughing, and my wife's like, what are you laughing at? And I'm like, it's so sweet. I got him. And that gets me to that final page there, what I hope to get into in a bit.
Yeah. Julian Raven is our guest this morning. We just got to take a short break, Julian. I'm going to get a little water here, and I'm excited for you. I always get excited when you're on the show. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Joining me in the studio, Julian Raven. So, Julian, where we left off is you have, you're the lawyer practically, so I don't know what the exact word is, but this motion.
Hobby lawyer.
So, what do you call this? This is the last motion?
This is the last motion that I filed that has caused them the DOJ to jump up and try to block it all. And you see, the Smithsonian being a trust, what the biggest error and I said before that they're idiots for doing this. Maybe that language is a little strong, but they're foolish. The Department of Justice is that they have denied consistently that it's a trust.
Yeah,
and I can't believe how they're arguing that, because it's right there
it's
in
clear
the
that
1846 Smithsonian Act from Congress. It's right there. It's a trust. That's all it is. There's nothing more than that. It's a trust. And so my struggle has been finding a way to legally attach my claims to the law. And obviously there are the constitutional issues, and that's what we got into the last time about what's called a Bivens remedy, which is a judicially created remedy where it gives people the right to sue federal officials. You see, we have the Civil Rights Act where you can sue government officials on a state level, but that doesn't apply to the federal government. So if a federal official violates your rights, there is no congressional law that you can sue them from. And that's a reason we need to get a law created. There is no way. So the Supreme Court created a remedy through a case called Bivens against 6 federal officers. And that was the grounds for me claiming violations of my constitutional rights, my free speech rights, viewpoint discrimination, the way that what she said, why she slapped down my application, she violated my viewpoint, so that I have my constitutional claims. But then on the other side, I have this claim, which has, believe it or not, I dismissed it from the case so I could take it back to the Smithsonian. It's called the Federal Tort Claims Act, FTCA, which is when a federal official violates, commits a tort, when they violate, like the postman driving down the road drives over your foot,
right?
And he's careless and he's negligence and he drives over your foot. Well, you can sue them under the FTCA. So I've got a big chunk of my claims now under that. It went 6 months through the Smithsonian. They kicked it to the curb again. So that's back there. But see, those two issues wrestling to find legal footing have been a real battle, because again, they've tried to make sure that Smithsonian there are no lawsuits that have succeeded and given grounds for a real claim to go through because of this disintegration that the institution has suffered, where it no longer is being treated like a trust. So my struggle has been to say, well, and I've argued it extensively over and over, it's a trust. And they come back and say, oh, he claims it's a trust and blah, blah, and they deny it.
Yeah.
They just do not treat it like a trust. They say no. And I'm like, this is absolutely outrageous. The sweetest thing happened to me just a few weeks ago, where I'm studying and I'm trying to find what other trusts does the federal government run?
Right.
Where is the federal government a trustee of something? For months, nothing. And then suddenly, and I get this, the way it works with me is I get these questions in my mind, and they're not in legal terms. They're like in just my words,
right.
And I'm wondering where, and then I like, how do I search for this? So then I start typing exactly what I'm thinking into Google to try and see if Google will pick up on it and bring me to the right. And sure enough, after enough time, it did. And I found these cases and I found these written in the Department of the Interior, a government website, departmentoftheinterior.gov. And you know what the federal government is a trustee of? All the Indian territories and lands.
Oh, wow.
They are trustees. The government is a trustee, a legal trustee. And the most beautiful part about it is I found all the cases where from the Supreme Court down, it obliges the federal government as trustee to be obedient to the common law of trusts. In other words, the federal government is not obedient to federal law. The federal government is obedient to common law, the regular law of the running of a trust. It was like a moment of euphoria for me, because now it's like all my claims of trusts and trustees and fiduciary duties and breach of trust and all this stuff that I've been arguing, I hadn't been able to pin it to the common law in the District of Columbia, the basic law that says this is how a trust should be run. And then I find all this documentation and cases from the Supreme Court down, which obliges the federal government to obey the common law of trust. So then I find in Washington, D.C., what's called the Uniform Trust Code of the District of Columbia, that the Smithsonian Institution, by decree from the Supreme Court, is obliged to obey. Oh, wow. Breach of trust, for the duty of loyalty, duty of care, for the duty of record keeping, for the duty of impartiality, all these in code, Frank, in code. You go through the claim and you read it. Here's the law, boom, 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 code this, code this, code this. This is the DC law of codes. And I said, they have not even denied my claims. They have tacitly or silently admitted to committing the acts that I've accused them of. And what they did was they were arguing, saying, well, we don't deny what he said, but it doesn't fit under this law and this law, so he has no case. And they completely forgot or didn't realize that whilst you're admitting that over there, you're actually confessing to breach of trust under the District of Columbia's Uniform Trust Code. And a judge in a trust case, Frank, they don't have to wait to trial to rule. A judge in a trust case is not a referee. A judge is always to take side of the will and the beneficiaries, not the trustees. And they can rule now. Mm-hmm. He can rule and rescind the decisions by defendant Sayet and Curran and the trustees who handed Curran my appeal. The judge has authority to overturn those decisions, to vacate them, to void them, to rescind them. And the motion is for the rescission of their decisions right now. For the judge to say, their decision is a breach of trust. I void that decision, and I'm sending your appeal back to the trustees, that they would hear your appeal because they handed it to an incompetent person who threw your appeal to the curb. And I found this article online that said you need to put the information in front of the judge. It's a young judge. He's 38 years old. He's new to the bench. And he was a federal prosecutor. He wasn't going after trust law and this type of thing. You have to put the law in front of him that educates him so that he knows we're dealing with a trust, and the trust by decree from the Supreme Court is subject to the common law of trust in the District of Columbia. They have not denied it. Their actions are completely, clearly a breach of trust. And as a result, you should see the list of things that he can do right now. And so I'm appealing for this relief from him to say, whilst the case goes forward for my other claims, he can now act and rescind and give me relief at this stage. And the Department of Justice is saying, we want to block this. Yeah. We want to block this now. Wow. And I'm like, yeah, right. Well, I'm going to make sure my response to her motion for a stay of briefing is going to be, I'm going to just lay it down again and say, this is ridiculous. This is the judge. See, and again, their mistakes, Frank, is that they have denied that the institution is a trust. And once the judge says, this is a trust, why are we not arguing it as a trust? Once he says that, and he rules, that's the grounds for the next person to say, you don't treat me right here. I'm a beneficiary of the will of James Smithson, and you've trampled on my rights as a beneficiary. You breached your fiduciary duty. You've breached trust, and you can sue them until they stop behaving like they should.
Any idea on when you'll hear from the judge, or this has probably all been no idea, right? It just
No, the motion to dismiss stage, and I've expanded the time as well, because before I'm like, I want this, I want and then you're like, yeah, you haven't got a clue. I mean, I pray for patience, and God has given me hardship to teach me patience, and I want to be patient. And then I finally get an attitude right now. I'm totally content now to wait. It might be another year before he rules on the motion to dismiss.
Oh, okay.
It could be that long. Wow. But he's going to now take these motions, because what can happen is that if he rules on like this motion, for example, tomorrow, and he gets it wrong, I can file what's called an interlocutory appeal. In other words, it's an appeal in the process of this case. I can already file to the Court of Appeals for them to start ruling on his mistakes if he were to get it wrong. That then mushrooms this case, and they want to contain it and dismiss it. It'll mushroom. I don't care how many times, because each ruling that I get is going to give grounds for the next person to say, you're not going to treat me like this. Right. And this case, Frank, has the potential to bring change in the Smithsonian, reformation, as we're seeing in our country right now, to bring it back to the foundational ideas, foundational charter and purpose, and say, this is what it is. Just do your job.
Just do your job.
Just do your job and have some integrity, and be a professional, and get these ideologues, these poisonous, vindictive, angry ideologues. They need to be fired, and we need to hire people. It doesn't matter whether you're liberal, Democrat, whatever, but you adhere to the Constitution and you uphold your oath, and end of story, and serve. And if you are incapable of doing that, you go back and work in the private sector, because you have no place working. And this woman, don't forget, she is the editor of our American pictorial history. She is changing and deliberately skewing history to her bent political position. She has no regard for my children, your children, our grandchildren. She has no regard for the future of our story as Americans. She wants to edit that because of her personal anti-Trump political bias. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. And I will fight this until we get to a place where we can say, in Trumpian fashion, you're fired.
Yeah, that's right. And Julian, I know I said this every time. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we all talk about draining the swamp. And I think a lot of people, when Trump got in there, said, okay, the swamp's going to be drained. Trump's the man. And I'm going to sit back and go about my everyday business. You've said it numerous times, I've said it numerous times, you've taken up the fight because Trump can't do it alone.
Absolutely. And we're the people. We, the people, Frank. Yep. We, the people. And everybody needs to get active. See, the liberals and these leftist loons, the thing that they have going for them is they manage to capture the hearts of the youth, and they get all this angry activism. The Tea Party was our activism, right. And then we've lost that right now. And if we sit back in the armchair and watch Trump and be like, he's gonna do it. Yeah. It's like, okay, great, get on with it. Yes. We're Americans. Yep. Get on with it. Those men that we celebrated yesterday, they stood up and they said no to tyranny, no to injustice. They said no to abuse. They said no to oppression, and they put their lives on the line. And if we do not echo that sentiment, what are we? Right. We must be like our forefathers in that sense.
Now, how can we help? I know everybody is thinking right now they want to be a part of the fight with you, Julian. How can they help you?
Pray for us. Pray for me. I've been in touch with Congressman Reed, and I've been going on a long time and trying to get Congressman Reed to put pressure through Congress on the Smithsonian, because Congressman Reed, as a congressman, is a trustee of the Smithsonian. It was Congress who received the will of James Smithson in trust. So call Congressman Reed. He knows everything about this. His people know about it. And put pressure on Congressman Reed to put pressure on Congress, put pressure on the Smithsonian that he can affect it from the top, from David Scorton, the director, down, and say, we want change, we want adherence to the law, to the Constitution, to the values of the Smithsonian, to our American story, and we want these leftist ideologues gone.
Yep. Julian Raven has been our guest this morning. Now everybody listening in knows what I mean when I said, how did Mark Molinaro follow you at the Elmira Republican? He was on a few weeks ago, and I said, how did you do that? Now people understand what I was saying. Well, Julian, thanks so much for being on the show. That was fun. We got to keep the updates going.
I will, when I have something like this significant for you, I will do it. I thank you, Frank, so much for having me on since the beginning. You've been there. You've championed this. You've been the mouthpiece for it. And all I can say is, We are Americans. I am a newborn American citizen. It is my honor and privilege to be here. I celebrated it yesterday with more significance than ever in my little life. And today is a new day. And for those of you out there, no matter where you are or who you are, pick up the phone, pick up a pen, write letters, and don't stop writing letters and phone calls. Phone calls seem to even be more effective than letters. Call these people, call Congress, call the government, call these officials, call them and call them and call them and call them and call them, and do not give up. And do not let up until we see change. And that's what we want. President Trump is the catalyst. He's the spark. He's changing. He's bringing America back to a picture we can actually recognize this country. It's up to us, though, to paint the rest of the picture.
You're right. Julian Raven's been our guest. Thanks so much, Julian. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Frank.